We're back with our panel. Peggy Noonan is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a CBS News contributor. Jamelle Bouie is the chief political correspondent for Slate magazine. Ron Brownstein is the editorial director at the National Journal. And Michael Gerson is a columnist for the Washington Post. Peggy, what did you think of Secretary Clinton's interview?
I thought it was unusual for her. I thought it was quite composed, direct, quite collected. It isn't that she changed, I think, too many of the things she's been saying for a while, but she seemed awfully comfortable. My own view was that she made mistakes on the issue of Planned Parenthood and late-term abortion when she didn't give an inch. She essentially said, Planned Parenthood, it's just fine. Late-term abortion, very complicated, but no, she won't be opposing it. These are issues that I think people are ready to be very thoughtful on, compromising on, and not extreme on. So I think we'll be hearing something about that.
I was struck by how conversational she was. I mean, you know, often when she gets on a kind of a news interview, her shoulders kind of metaphorically clench, and she had kind of her daytime demeanor. I mean, she was very approachable and maybe a little overly dismissive, I think, of the questions on the email. But I was struck by how much that she was trying to kind of let people in, and this idea that I'm a real person. I mean, look, her real challenge is the email issue is not going away. The question is that the only thing on the ledger? Can she fill the other side of the ledger? There are people for whom that is going to disqualify her, but probably most of those are people who aren't going to vote for her anyway. The question is, can she convince most Americans that there's more to her than what she is now admitting was a mistake?
Yeah. Jamelle, this comes at a time in strategy for the Clinton campaign where they're trying to put her more out in front. Assess where that strategy stands, where her campaign stands.
I think it was on Friday or on Thursday, she did a town hall, not a town hall, but some kind of event in New Hampshire on substance abuse. And it was her and a relatively small group of people, and like it was very conversational and very sort of casual. And if those are the kinds of events the strategy is focused on, I think it's going pretty well. She came across very well during the entire event. And obviously that's not reaching millions of people, but consistently, steadily, over the course of a couple months, it reaches a lot of people, and it does show people a different side of Clinton than you see on a national interview or in a speech.
Yeah. What do you think, Mike?
I do think that the Clinton campaign has often had the flaw of saying we need to be more transparent and human. Like, actually need to be more transparent.
Yeah.
And I think she did some of that today. She was casual, maybe some of it a forced casual, but she was, you know, she responded really well. But I think Democrats are wondering, is she going to show appropriate urgency? Her approval numbers are the lowest they've ever been, since lower than any time at the 2008 election. She's lost ground among women. This is a serious problem here. And if Joe Biden gets into this race, it would be a very serious race.
You know, the question is, what is the remedy to the problem? And you know, when Bill Clinton was reelected in 1996, on the day he was reelected in the exit poll, a majority of people said they did not consider him honest and trustworthy. Right. So that by itself is not a disqualifying kind of variable. The reason he survived is because most people think he cared about people like them, was focused on their problems, and was trying to make things better. And I think it is more likely that if she recovers from what Michael points out is a very low point, she's going to recover more by improving on that front than radically changing the assessment of her honesty. I think that you could make that somewhat better. That's never going to be ideal for her. I think the core question for her is whether she can convince most Americans that she understands their problems after being in powerful positions for 20 years, as you kind of pointed out, and that she has solutions relevant to those problems. And I think that is where the work has to go. And I think it's an open question whether she can get there.
Yeah, Ron pointed out when I said, you know, that people are looking for change, and you know, there have been a lot of Clintons around. She said, well, the first woman, that's fine, that's quite true, and that would be historic. But we know that that's not what they are. So what's your reaction to that?
Mrs. Clinton has been part of the American establishment, operating at the part of American national political life for a quarter century now. Of course, she is not an outsider. You couldn't be more an insider. Interestingly, if Joe Biden does decide to come up against her, that will be another insider, not an outsider, going up against her. But look, I think part of what she's doing now is simply thinking, I can't dodge the press on all of these issues that are besetting me. I look furtive and defensive. So she's come out here, and I think she'll be coming out probably a great deal more as we see what happens with Mr. Biden and what that represents.
It's amazing how lowering poll numbers do that.
Yeah, it makes you friendly.
All of a sudden, Sunday shows are a lot more attractive than
to the outsider question.
Or all politicians.
To the outsider question, though, I'm not actually sure the Democratic electorate is so allergic to insiders. I mean, if you look at the people who have the highest poll totals, they are Secretary Clinton and Joe Biden.
Yeah. Mike Gerson, let's switch to the Republican side. There was a debate last week. Donald Trump, where does he stand coming out of that debate? He's been the leader at the top of the polls. Give us your assessment.
It was really mixed because the Trump issues to some extent did dominate. You know, Jeb Bush announced a tax plan since the last debate. You know, Walker announced a health care plan. None of that was discussed. The 14th Amendment was discussed. You know, throwing illegal, 11 million people out of the country was discussed. So that still, I think, dominated the Republican discourse. But Trump himself was tired, repetitive, I think not very impressive.
You're not suggesting he was low energy.
No, he was actually boring. And that's the worst thing that Donald Trump can be, is boring. That is how he will eventually lose, when people think this is no longer an entertainment.
Yeah.
Ron, you have often found creative ways to understand the coalitions in these parties. What is the shape of the Republican coalition, given that we have 16 candidates?
Right, and you know, it's really interesting. I think one of the things this election is showing, this primary season, is showing Republicans their coalition is different than many of them think. I mean, the fact is, over the past generation, really since the 1960s, much of the white working class has realigned from the Democratic Party, from the FDR coalition, into the Republican Party, and this has inexorably changed the nature of the Republican voting electorate. Half of the Republican voters in both 2012 and 2008 in the primaries were voters without a college education. And that is a clear fissure in preferences today. Donald Trump, in that ABC Washington Post poll right before the debate, was at 40% in a 15-person field. He was at 40% among Republicans without a college education, only 20% among those with a college education. And if you look at those blue-collar Republicans, they are probably the most alienated element of American society. And in fact, they support an awful lot of what Donald Trump is talking about. A majority of non-college Republicans would deport all 11 million people. 60% of them say it bothers them when they hear people speaking a foreign language. So he has an audience there. The question is what he does to feed that audience. Raises the barriers with the rest of the party, and we already see in polling some resistance to him in that white-collar part of the Republican Party.
The question here is not whether that group will win. I think that's unlikely. The question is whether a Republican coalition that includes that group can win national elections in an increasingly diverse country.
Right. It's not just diversity, because there's pressure on both sides, right? You have, obviously, that alienates African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans, but there are plenty of white Americans who don't like the idea of voting for a party that stands for that kind of stuff. And they may not vote for Democrats, but they may just not come out.
But you know what? Trump sort of reminds you, when you see him, even when he's stale, even when he's stalled, he somehow reminds you, just by his being, of how much you hate the current American political system and those who populate it. I think the challenge for him now is to try to hold on to what he's got and try to move forward by reminding people how much they hate what there is now.
Michael, what about Carly Fiorina? She seems to have done well out of this. How does she capitalize on that?
I think she won her debate, her first debate. She won the second debate. But if you won the presidency by debates, we'd have President Newt Gingrich. Okay. You know, she is a very strong candidate. She is the outsider who knows a lot, actually is conversant with issues, understands foreign policy issues, intervenes effectively in these debates. So this is an outsider with clear campaign skills. She did, in California, lose pretty badly. She lost it on her business record, which looks too Romney-like, perhaps. And so there's a real vulnerability here. She has not had the level of scrutiny that, before, that she will have now.
She's about to get pounded.
With more visibility comes more vulnerability. No question about that. But look, I think the fact that the polls are moving so much after each of these debates is somewhat self-invalidating. The fact that they can move that much with one debate is a sign that they probably don't mean all that much to begin with. But I would say,
sorry, what would we do if we didn't break them with meaning?
Or another way of putting it is that there are going to be a lot of intervening events between now and when people vote, and they're going to change a lot. Look, there really are two races going on in the Republican Party. There are two distinct brackets, right? I mean, you have this kind of populist, more blue-collar, more alienated bracket that has Trump, that has Carson, that has Huckabee, Santorum, Jindal, Walker, Ted Cruz, certainly right at the top of that. And then you have Bush, Kasich, Christie, probably Rubio. The first group more focused on Iowa, the second group more focused on New Hampshire. History says that each of those brackets will produce, in all likelihood, one of the finalists, and ultimately they will battle it out.
Jamelle, quickly, who do you think in that other group, who did poorly in this debate? Did anybody slip, really?
I think Walker did very poorly. I joked while watching it that he spoke at the second hour of that debate, and I was like, "Oh, Walker's alive. He's here." I think the post-debate polls are indicative of the fact that he kind of just disappeared. I think Rubio and Kasich did extremely well. I think they both came across very knowledgeable, very smart. I think Rubio, although some of his lines felt a bit rehearsed, were delivered extremely well and kind of show an ability to connect policy to biography to political message that not really anyone else in that field has.
Yeah.
He does an interesting thing, Rubio, where he doesn't put himself forward, he doesn't interrupt, but he waits for the game to come to him. And when it does, he gets a hit.
Right.
You know, it's a funny thing to see.
Or he skates to where the puck is going to be, as Wayne Gretzky famously said.
Yeah.
Yes. So look, I mean, you know, the fact is that I think there, you know, as I said, in all likelihood, you will have an outsider populist who will emerge, and as it gets down to March and beyond, you will have someone more from kind of the center-right establishment bracket. And Rubio, I think Rubio's big question for him is which bracket is he ultimately playing in? Right. Is he an Iowa outsider guy or is he a New Hampshire insider guy?
Right. Mr. Gerson, the last word goes to you.
Well, I think, you know, the question here is whether the establishment bet is going to work. Both Bush and Clinton are taking the establishment bet, where you build organization, you build, you know, your structure, you have money, you do all these things, and it's usually been a good bet, except in 1964 and 1972. The question is this year different? Will the establishment bet work?
That's right. All right. Michael Gerson gets the last word. Thanks to all of you.